The Miami Dolphins have had a pretty significant amount of success with undrafted free agents over the past few years. In this year's class, who is the best odds to make the team and be the next success story from an undrafted rookie?
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Today is Tuesday, May 28th, 2024, and today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. We are looking at the Dolphins roster today now that the dust is settled and they've kind of filled out to the max of number of players that you can have on your offseason roster. And we're looking at the undrafted free agent class, and I've kind of taken my time with this. I know when the draft first closed and there was the first flurry of signings, I aspired to do the content then. And I'm glad I waited because it's really allowed me to kind of get what I feel is a pretty good handle on this undrafted free agent class in its totality. And Miami has a lot of competition for practice squad spots with a lot of infusion of these guys. There's a couple of these guys that I really like. Pathways to the 53 is a little bit of a different story just because of the nature of Miami's collection of talent. And I think some of the better players that Miami actually collected is some of the more competitive spots on the roster too, which further complicates that issue of saying and pegging, yeah, this guy's going to make the roster, this guy's going to make the roster. But the first thing we need to do is acknowledge who are the undrafted free agents that are on the offseason roster as you get ready for training camp here in about 2 months, right? It's the end of July is when they'll open up training camp. And then before you know it, there'll be public practices that everybody's going to be filming on their cell phones. Then there's going to be joint practices with all three teams that the Dolphins are going to play in the preseason. And then we'll get the cuts in September. And I believe Adam Schefter put out season openers 100 days away from today, right? It'll mercifully be here before we know it. But want to acknowledge the undrafted free agents that the Dolphins have before we spend a little time on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball and say, yeah, I think that this guy's got a shot to be an NFL player and stick. Quarterback, Gavin Hardison, well known for his powerful arm out of UTEP, is the lone undrafted free agent in that room. There are no undrafted running backs, which is good because that's a busy room. I think you legit have 6 guys that have NFL rosterable caliber on the running back room, plus Alec Ingle, if you want to qualify him as a running back. Now, at wide receiver, the Dolphins do have Jaquan Burton. At tight end, Hayden Rusi from Wisconsin. The offensive line, there's some interesting competition. 4 names here in total. Bayron Matos from South Florida. Matthew Jones from Ohio State. Center guard flex capable player. Andrew Meyer, also from UTEP. Dolphins apparently saw something they liked in that Miners offense. And then Ireland Brown, former defensive lineman, now at center. Out of Rutgers this past year. Those are the names on the offensive side of the ball. A wide receiver, a tight end, a quarterback, 4 offensive linemen. Well, healthy competition never hurts. We'll get into some of these guys and their specifics here in just a minute. On the defensive side of the ball, Leonard Payne from Colorado and Mario Kendricks from Virginia Tech. And Kendricks was a recent add. He was added, I think, like 2 weeks ago. So that was not somebody who got an initial call. Grayson Murphy from UCLA is an edge rusher, productive player. A little surprised he went undrafted, to be honest. But again, the dynamics of where the Dolphins do and don't have right now complicate that conversation a little bit for Grayson Murphy. You have Isaiah Johnson, a cornerback from Syracuse. Mark Perry at safety. Mark Perry is from TCU. Jordan Colbert, another safety. Jordan Colbert is from Rhode Island. Storm Duck, one of the best names in college football. And he's been around the block a few places, most recently at Louisville, spent some time at North Carolina and App State, I think. UNC by App State via Louisville, I think, is the full journey that he's had. He's bounced around at the college level a little bit. And then Jason Maitre from Wisconsin at corner, probably profiling as a nickel corner based on his stature. So those are the, in totality, undrafted free agents that the Dolphins have. I look at this group and just as an overall collective thought, I'd set the over-under for guys that make the roster a little bit lower than most years. And last year it was a surprise, right? You still had Brandon Peely that surprised and made the initial roster for the Dolphins last year. You had Julian Hill at tight end who made the initial roster and actually played like 300 snaps for you offensively. I'm not quite sure you're going to have the same intersection of weak spots on the roster with an available talent that would rise to the occasion to fill a very specific kind of role, which was Brandon Peely's a nose tackle, right? He's a backup nose tackle. And he ended up playing, a hop, skip, and a jump's worth of snaps for you. And then you had Julian Hill, who kind of by de facto became the blocking in space or flex tight end. Brandon Peely played a total of 51 snaps and 21 of them were on special teams. But Julian Hill was like, you knew tight end was a weak spot for you. Durham Smythe is a skill-specific kind of player. Alec Ingold, more of a backfield move type piece that can complement your tight ends. There's certainly some cracks in this Dolphins roster still here on May 28th. And in just a couple of days, they'll get the June 1st money, and we'll see what they do with that. I'm not sure how much of, wow, there's a void that I think that guy can really step into I see from this group. Now, there's players that I like quite a bit, and we're going to get into the offensive side of that next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins, so make sure that you stick with us. Going to the game should not be stressful. You love your sporting teams, and even if you decide last minute that you want to go to the Marlins game or the Panthers in the Eastern Conference Finals or a Dolphins game this fall, make sure you get your tickets with Gametime. Gametime gives you the tickets without the stress. You can save up to 60% off by buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. With flash deals and zone deals, you can save even more. And with all-in pricing, you can see the total price before you put the tickets into your cart, so there's no surprises when you go to check out. You get the panoramic view, so you know exactly what the sight lines are for your seat before you hit purchase. And with the Gametime guarantee, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find tickets in the same row and section for less somewhere else. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today for last-minute tickets with the lowest prices, guaranteed. Offensively, from the undrafted group, the way that we'll just work from the top and go down, right? The way that roster rules have changed this offseason, carrying 3 quarterbacks ever is a pretty unlikely outcome for a team. So I think that puts Skylar Thompson on the bubble. And by extension, I don't think it matters how well Gavin Hardison plays as a UDFA coming in. That's a hard hill to climb out of. Now, Skylar's coming into year 3, and he's got 2 years left on his rookie deal. I think there's maybe an interesting conversation about, like, could Gavin Hardison end up being the practice squad caliber quarterback? Like, and if you wanted to have two on the practice squad and keep Skyler to be your emergency third quarterback who gets elevated every single week, you could do that. And I think Gavin Hardison certainly has an opportunity to stick with the Dolphins, but it turned me as a practice squad player, more so because of the dynamics of quarterbacks and rostering quarterbacks and how that has changed this offseason. For the two skill guys, Hayden Rusi and Jaquan Burton, I actually like Hayden Rusi a good bit. I just got done watching the Illinois tape for him from last year. Obviously, the receiving profile is not one that really moves the needle for you, but a good blocker. I think he's got good strain. I think he's got good functional strength. He's got good size. He plays at an offense that asked him to do a lot of inline stuff. He moved around a bit and picked up some blocks in space and some split flow. I like Hayden Rusi, and I think you do look at the tight end room in its totality, and the numbers game is going to be a bit of a problem because you've invested in Jonnu Smith on a 2-year contract. You obviously have Durham Smythe, who's been here for a while. Julian Hill was the breakout this year. Tanner Connor was the pet project the year before. And then Jody Fortson is a totally different kind of body type, like power forward receiving style player that you don't have. Like even Jonnu Smith, he's a different kind of player than Jody Fortson. Jody Fortson's a lot of injury stuff that's prevented him from kind of breaking out and realizing his full potential. So how much do you really invest there? Tight end 3 is a little up in the air, I guess. Like, for my money, I would say Jody Fortson's going to be the third best tight end on the roster. I think Jonnu Smith, for what he brings in the passing game and his versatility from an alignment perspective and being able to block in space, yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. Durham Smythe, he is what he is at this point in his career, but he's been a long tenured player, has developed into a really quality depth tight end, solid tight end 2 on a depth chart. Unfortunately, just last year, he had to be the tight end 1. Julian Hill, and I saw there were a couple of YouTube comments about Julian Hill last week, and I don't question, like, Julian Hill did some nice things for you out of Campbell. And far exceeded expectations. But the question is the developmental curve and the ceiling versus the floor and how long that's going to take in the midst of a competitive window. Do you continue to invest a 53 roster spot in that player, or do you hope that you can do with Julian Hill, which you kind of did with Tanner Connor the year before, and say, hey, we want to continue to develop you, but we think there's some better contributions we can get elsewhere in the tight end room on game days. So we're going to put somebody else in the 53. I think Hayden Rusi is more of a Durham Smythe than he is a Jody Fortson or a Jonnu Smith, but like Miami also is getting ready to do some bigger contracts. Durham Smythe's kind of an upper middle class contract in general. I think that's a potential upgrade opportunity based on the other talent that you brought in. So do you want to invest the kind of dollars that you do long-term beyond 2024? It's just questions, right? All that to say, I think the competition at tight end, I think Rusi's got a better chance in my mind to make the roster than Jaquan Burton does. But I think there's a lot of complicating variables for me to say, hey, I think Hayden Rusi is going to make the roster. He just happens to be, of all of the offensive players on tape, the guy who I liked his tape the most, personally. Among the 4 offensive linemen, I think Bayron Matos is a slam dunk home run practice squad caliber player because he qualifies for the international player portal. 6'9", 320 pounds. Like tools for days kind of guy. Teams that can get their hands on guys like that, and if you can get it to click, that's some really exciting type of stuff. And you know, I know we have Patrick Paul as a second-round pick in the same rookie class, but seeing how there was this leap from Keon Smith within this scheme, or a perceived leap within this scheme for Keon Smith, guy like Baron Matos, kind of the same thought process as Patrick Paul. Look, these guys are like freaky athletes. Betting on those kinds of guys, and especially getting a guy who can not cost you even a practice squad spot, right? Because he qualifies for the international player portal or international player. Is it portal? It's not the transfer portal. He's an international player. So he can fill a bonus spot on your practice squad is the point. Matthew Jones has enough positional versatility that I think he's kind of got the inside track to be the best of the offensive line undrafted free agents. There's just a math problem that you have. And I know we're concerned about the top of the offensive line depth chart, but if you look at the entirety and the depth of it, there's a math problem y'all have. We're going to go through it real quick. Ron Armstead, Isaiah Wynn, Aaron Brewer, Robert Jones, Austin Jackson are your current projected starters. Kendall Lamb, Patrick Paul, your backup tackle / swing tackle competition that's going to take place. You have Jack Driscoll, who's getting cross-trained everywhere, including center, so he can play all 5 spots. Liam Eichenberg has proven, regardless of how good it is, he can play all 5 spots. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We didn't touch Keon Smith yet. That would be 10. We didn't touch Lester Cotton, who played over 600 snaps for you last year. That's 11. Now, I would not keep all of these guys personally. I'd probably aspire to have 9. And I think like Liam Eichenberg should probably be your 9th offensive lineman. But if your 9th offensive lineman is a player with 3 years of significant playing experience who could play all 5 spots, like you're going to be in a good spot. But they have 11 guys that are probably going to be on 53s. How does an undrafted free agent not only crack into this 53, but beat out, I wouldn't say it's a stretch of imagination. I think he beats out Lester Cotton, but you got a lot of competition just to get into the conversation. I just don't know that I see the numbers, even though we have concerns about the top. And obviously with the depth, your 9th offensive lineman could very easily become your 7th offensive lineman before you know it. So that's the offensive side of the ball. Player I liked the most was Hayden Rusi. We're going to get into the defense side of the ball next year on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. It is winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Defensively, I think you have some interesting competition to take place. You added 2 more names to this smorgasbord of interior defensive line talent. Dolphins obviously bringing in Davion Nixon and Isaiah Mack early, and then they signed Neville Gallimore, and they bring in Benito Jones, and they sign Jonathan Harris, and Tier Tart gets added to the mix. It's a lot, right? And as we covered on the Monday show, looking at the Ravens depth chart from last year, Baltimore had, 7 interior defensive linemen take 280 plus snaps on the season? Like, a lot of these guys are going to play. So plan accordingly as far as numbers on the roster. I think this is maybe where you could see somebody with an inside track to kind of crack the rotation, because to be the 7th, you have to beat out Davion Nixon, Isaiah Mack, and Brandon Peely. I don't think that's unheard of. I think this is probably the best opportunity out of all the ones that we have for the Dolphins so far. This is probably the one where I look at the most and I say, yeah, like somebody could crack this rotation. I liked Leonard Payne more than Mario Kendricks. Mario Kendricks, I just finished watching his tape last night. And you could see that some of the athleticism that exists and is there. I just thought the consistency as far as like being a powerful player versus being a little bit more of a gap shooter, but like the production wasn't super high. It's kind of this weird limbo to exist in. So I like Leonard Payne more than I ended up liking Mario Kendricks for the interior guys, but that is an opportunity spot that I think is probably more ripe than anywhere else on the roster other than maybe safety. I look at the safety group, and obviously there's an investment in Patrick McMorris as a 6th-round pick to go with Elijah Campbell and Javon Holland and Jordan Poyer and Saron Neal. And as we mentioned yesterday, 3 safeties played a lot for Miami, but if you're going to qualify Jalen Ramsey as a defensive weapon, then all of a sudden your 3rd safety now is hypothetically Jordan Poyer. This one's going to be decided by teams, special teams, right? McMorris as a draft pick obviously is a bit of a roadblock, but I don't think the investment with a 6th-round pick is so high that you're going to look at it and say, well, they drafted a guy. He's going to block out any of the UDFAs to make the roster. I think Patrick McMorris's most appealing sell is all the same things that somebody else in this group of Jordan Colbert and Mark Perry and potentially Jason Maitre and Storm Duck, all these undrafted DBs, they're going to have to make the impact the same way. But I do think Mark Perry, the one from TCU, is probably the one who I like the most for what he profiles as to kind of latch on and stick. Played at Colorado for 3 years. Ended up being a long tenured starter starting in 2021. In Colorado, he started. And then in 2022, he started at TCU with 14 starts. He was honorable mention all Big 12 in 12 games. Productive player. Nice blend of backfield production, getting his hands on balls. Good tackler, played some special teams. He ran track for Colorado back in 2020. So there's enough here for me to look at Mark Perry and say, I could see you making a bit of a splash. He's explosive. You know, we mentioned the track stuff. His pro day on March 28th, that was 2 months ago. At 213 pounds at safety, ran a 4.42, jumped 37 inches in the vertical jump, had a 10'11" standing broad jump, and had pretty good agilities. So there's enough here with Mark Perry for me to peg as probably the best intersection of some attractive physical ability, experience playing special teams, some splash production that flashes, in a position room where there's a rookie draft pick, but not a high rookie draft pick. And the special teams element could end up being the tiebreaker for if somebody ends up breaking through and actually making the 53. So out of all of the undrafted free agents that you have, I like Hayden Roosty the most. I like Matthew Jones, the interior offensive lineman from Ohio State. I like Leonard Payne from Colorado. I think Mark Perry's the one with the best total environment and individual resume. Now, whether or not that means you make the 53, that's going to start in 2 months. And obviously they will have their hands on with some of these guys with OTAs and minicamp and all that kind of stuff before training camp. But that's kind of my gauge on the undrafted free agent class. Those would be the names that I would be watching. And I will be watching when training camp rolls around, and I'm having the opportunity to watch it, which is getting here soon. We have some other good stuff coming up this week here on Locked On Dolphins, so make sure you don't miss it. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Make it a great rest of your day. Fins up. I am out of here. Hope you guys come back. See us again tomorrow.